answer. Well, okay. Thank you, by the way, for listening.
I appreciate your wife's advice about politics, but I would be incredibly disappointed to leave this meeting without hearing Felix Moose make a comment on how our politics have evolved. What is your experience with what's happening in our political system? Use the mic.
Well, I really blame our schools and our universities to some extent. In other words, what is happening today has a great deal to do with education. How sophisticated are our students in terms of knowing the difference between an open democratic process? I don't have to tell you, I mean, this is a new era in the ecumenical ministries. But I miss the olden days where we had different ideas. We could debate with each other meaningfully, and we didn't just dismiss a person because that or that other person had different ideas. You remember probably what happened in the Vietnam conflict. I mean, our campus, remember, people got killed. The Union was burned. You know, I had to sleep in Fraser Hall because the university was afraid the students would steal their grades in our offices, and we had to sleep in our offices. Well, but anyway, I quite agree with you that we must do more, and it seems to me the election of last November is a result of this division in our own culture. Today, New York and California have different cultures than Idaho and maybe Montana, or maybe the South. As you know, the South used to be democratic. It is no longer the case. Look at North Carolina. Look at Houston. So what I'm saying is, at a time where anthropology could be really helpful, anthropology at KU is at the lowest point in many years, because people don't understand that biological anthropology focusing on genetics and evolution is as useful as is cultural anthropology focusing on Nigeria, is as useful as linguistic anthropology focusing on Xinjiang in China, where Uyghurs are speaking a different language than the Chinese in Shanghai.
Is it conceivable that part of the problem is that all these countries, ours included, we're trying to assimilate so many cultures, and so that means we're more confused and more disintegration?
Because we don't
individual
recognize that assimilation means that we teach that culture is very powerful. I mean, what you eat, I could excite you by saying that obviously courtship happens in every culture. If we didn't have courtship, you and I wouldn't be here. But the way you actually do it is quite different. In my discipline, Margaret Mead, who became famous by writing her book on Samoa, argued that Samoans have an easier time because they are less stressful than we are. I don't have to tell you that American society in general has not made great progress in being a society that is as open as it used to be. Even in my experience, KU today is more divided than ever by politics.
How would you sort of, we have this sort of nationalization of our culture in terms of, say, for example, McDonald's, Walmart, Starbucks. Then you have the converse thing of the balkanization of local cultures, like you just said, the South. So how does that sort of, that seems diametrically opposed. I mean, we're like, we could eat in the same place all over the country, but yet the culture's different. So what is that about?
Well, I think the overriding American culture, if you listen, last night the president announced his choice for the new Supreme Court justice. And maybe you will agree that two of the most dividing ideas are abortion and what represents religion in our everyday life. In other words, that we are divided, really. Abortion is no problem in Europe. I really tried in my 9 weeks to hear any discussion in Germany and Switzerland about abortion. There is none. They agree. Abortion is a matter that really is between a female, her partner, and a physician. That she should make a decision that she can live with. That is not the case in the United States. We are talking about the Constitution. I ask my students, what is the cement that keeps Americans together today? It is the Constitution, because everybody says you can't do that, it's not in the Constitution. Well, I must remind you, when the Constitution was written, the world was very different than it is today. And therefore, if you listened to the argument answering your question last night, it was, is the new Supreme Court justice a conservative who interprets the Constitution as it was written, or is he a progressive who recognizes that obviously the Constitution is a document that must evolve into our own culture of today? That is what divides Americans. And the fear is that, the shift between 5 to 4 will now shift with a person. So I don't expect that the new justice will be approved in the next few days. So we are more divided, but we are really not talking about our common culture. We are focusing on some features with which we have lived. And obviously, for most of us, the problem of abortion is not one that we have to deal with every day in our own life. Why should that become a divisive issue in American society today? It's a medical problem. But obviously, it depends if you accept that a living human being begins on day 1 of conception. What is the consciousness of the being that is created on day 1? In other words, we have very little discussion, really, of the real issue. We are divided because we have one idea about it rather than another.
Do you think that there's any chance that we come to a realization that abortion is not even something that should ever have been politicized in the first
No,
place?
because Americans,
Separated between church and state, and that certainly
Yeah.
is.
because Americans today have become, everything is evaluated according to politics. It's not evaluated in terms of natural law. It's politics. And politics are connected to money. So I'm not very hopeful that in the few remaining years of my life, I will be seeing a solution in the United States to, I think we will become ever more divided because we have so little understanding that what really makes us the way we act and live is culture.
So you're predicting that the present divisiveness will evolve into more divisiveness as opposed to evolved into some kind of collaborative ability to civilly relate to each other?
I think the better educated the population is, the more you have a meaningful discussion of different ideas. I don't think KU today tolerates different ideas. I'm very famous for being politically incorrect.
Same here.
I have not been the darling of the Ecumenical Ministry Center because I had very strong ideas about Vietnam.
You should never have gone into Vietnam.
Well, I read an article recently talking about democracies go through stages, and we're sort of in late stage democracy, where every group fights for their independence and wants their own freedom, and so they can't communicate. So, like, they become so balkanized, and they're like, I have this, I have that, this is my right to be this way, that way, and
Well, one step in that direction would be to accept English as the national language of the United States. Everyone who is a citizen of the United States must know English. Or if you want to change it to French or whatever, but have a common language.
And we can fight with each
Believe
other in
me,
common language.
believe me, look it up. English is not the official language of the United States.
Is there no official language?
so that's kind of like everyone's saying, well, I have a right to speak French or Cambodian or Thai. You can't make me speak English.
There are many communities in the United States that argue, why should I learn English? Can you really integrate into the life of Lawrence, Kansas, if you don't speak English?
It'll be tough.
So I think if we can't even agree on the most fundamental way that we could communicate with each other, how do you think we can be hopeful to accept different ideas on politics? The Constitution was written in English, but we are arguing about the meaning. There's nothing in the Constitution that talks about abortion.
I'm going to carry out of this one predominant idea, that societies need not to assimilate too fast and too many. Because I think it's still messing things up. If you can't have a common language, a common culture, what do you got? How can you call a people a country?
Yeah, you can't.
So you,
You can't.
another fact I'm carrying out of this meeting, and I think I heard correctly, that 17 million people in the Middle East are waiting.
Well, Africa primarily. They're waiting to come across the Mediterranean.
The
and obviously from the Middle East.
To Europe.
I close with one anecdote. My wife and I occasionally eat lunch in a steak restaurant on Iowa. Not many months ago, we drove by Best Buy, and there was a woman sitting on the corner with a sign, "I'm hungry, I have 2 children, please help me." We stopped, as we would, of course. And I assumed because the individual looked either Latin American or Asian, I tried to speak Spanish, habla inglés. I had no luck. I then tried French, vous parlez français. I had no luck. Guess what? I tried German, sprechen Sie Deutsch? The person said, yes, ich kann Deutsch. In the conversation, it turned out she was a gypsy from Bulgaria.
How'd she get over here?
I asked the person, how did you get to the United States?
Yeah.
She went to Guatemala, somehow, across the Atlantic, and then walked across, from Mexico. So, obviously, it's happening now. How do we integrate these people? Do we really teach our students how to deal with these millions of refugees? We have more refugees today than we had during World War II. World War II was about 60 million. Today we have about 70 million people who are walking.
And yet there's, in Kansas and on this campus, there's a small group that is desperately opposed to any kind of diversity.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole idea of diversity is like,
Well, diversity is okay if we have a common means to communicate with each other. Without that, I am very pessimistic that we can absorb all the people we are absorbing.
we'll resolve our own issue.
Well, I tell people that I'm not fluent in any language, including English.
Well, but at
the
least we
problem.
have some common means to communicate. You can say, I disagree with you.
Well, I
In
probably
English.
do, but I haven't figured it out yet.
Well, thank you, Felix. We propose.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for listening.
It was a very interesting